My family hid my grandma's 100K inheritance and gave it to my cousin. I found her will in a box. I took them to court. Their faces, when I won, were unforgettable. So picture this. I'm 29, living in my cramped apartment, working 2 jobs just to keep the lights on when I decide to finally clean out my late grandma's house. She'd been gone for 3 years, and honestly, I'd been putting it off because going through her stuff just hit different, you know? But my parents kept bugging me about clearing out the place since they were trying to sell it. I'm up in her dusty attic, sneezing every 5 seconds, when I spot this old wooden chest tucked behind some Christmas decorations. The thing looked like something straight out of a pirate movie. No joke. I figured it was just more of Grandma's old photo albums or maybe some vintage dishes she never used. Boy, was I wrong. Inside, underneath some yellow doilies and what looked like a million church bulletins, I found this manila envelope with my name written on it in Grandma's shaky handwriting. My heart started doing this weird flutter thing as I opened it up, and there it was. Her last will and testament, dated just 6 months before she passed. I'm reading through all the legal mumbo-jumbo, and then I see it clear as day. To my beloved granddaughter, I leave the sum of $100,000 from my savings account at First National Bank. $100,000. I had to read it 3 times because my brain just couldn't process it. But here's where it gets real messed up. I'm me. Thinking back to when Grandma died, and my parents sat me down with this whole sob story about how there wasn't much money left after the funeral expenses and taxes. Dad was all like, "Sorry, kiddo, Grandma's medical bills ate up most of her savings. There's maybe enough left to cover the funeral, but that's about it." Mom nodded along, doing that thing where she gets all teary-eyed and pats my hand. "I know, you were hoping for something to help with your college loans, sweetheart, but sometimes life just doesn't work out the way we plan." I believed them. Why wouldn't I? These are my parents we're talking about, the people who raised me, who I trusted, with everything. So I just accepted it, went back to my 2 jobs at Target and the local diner, kept grinding away at those student loans that felt like they were growing faster than I could pay them off. But sitting there in that attic, holding this will, I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. Where was my 100 grand? What happened? To it, update. Hey everyone, thanks for all the support so far. This gets so much worse. Should I confront my parents directly or dig deeper first? What would you do? I decided to do some detective work before confronting anyone. First stop was First National Bank, where I sweet-talked this older teller into checking Grandma's account history. Turns out, 3 months after Grandma passed, there was a withdrawal for exactly $100,000. The signature on the withdrawal slip? My dad's. My hands were literally shaking as I asked for copies of everything. The teller, bless her heart, could see I was about to lose it and quietly slipped me the paperwork, along with some tissues. I'm sitting in my beat-up Honda Civic in the bank parking lot staring at these documents when everything started clicking into place. Remember my cousin Trevor? The golden boy of the family who could do no wrong? 3 months after Grandma died, he suddenly had enough money to start his own contracting business. New truck, fancy tools, the whole 9 yards. Trevor had always been the favorite. When we were kids, he'd break something, and somehow I'd get blamed for not watching him better. He failed out of community college twice, but it was just Trevor finding his path. Meanwhile, I graduated summa cum laude from State University, and my achievement got maybe a 5-minute mention at Christmas dinner before the conversation shifted back to Trevor's latest scheme. I remember thinking it was weird how he suddenly had all this startup cash, especially since Uncle Mike was always complaining about money. But when I asked where Trevor got the funds, the family just said he'd been saving up and working really hard. Now I knew the truth. He'd been working hard with my inheritance money. The more I thought about it, the madder I got. While I was working doubles at the diner, serving truckers coffee at 5 a.m., Trevor was using my grandma's money to build his dream business. While I was eating ramen noodles for dinner 4 nights a week, he was probably taking clients out to fancy steakhouses on my dime. I spent the next week gathering evidence like I was building a case for one of those true crime shows. Bank records, copies of the will, even text messages where Trevor bragged about his successful business venture to our other cousins. The paper trail was cleaner than a freshly mopped floor. That's when I called up Johnson & Associates, this law firm downtown that had decent Google reviews and didn't look too intimidating. The consultation fee was $50 I really couldn't afford, but I figured it was worth it to know where I stood legally. Mr. Johnson was this no-nonsense guy in his 50s who looked like he'd seen every type of family drama imaginable. I laid out the whole situation, showed him the will, the bank records, everything. He listened quietly, occasionally making notes on a yellow legal pad. "Well," he said after reviewing everything, "this is pretty cut and dried. The transfer of your inheritance without your knowledge or consent was illegal. Your grandmother's will is clear, and your father had no legal right to redistribute those funds, even to family." He explained that we could file a lawsuit to recover the money, plus interest and legal fees. The case was so straightforward that he was willing to work on contingency, meaning I wouldn't pay him unless we won. But here's what really got me fired up. Mr. Johnson mentioned that since 3 years had passed, the money had probably grown in value through Trevor's business investments. We could potentially recover not just the original $100,000, but whatever profit had been made using my inheritance as startup capital. I felt like I was finally getting some power back in this whole messed up situation. Update. Plot twist. Coming up. My family has no idea what's about to hit them. The lawsuit is filed, and I'm staying quiet until the perfect moment. When should I drop the bomb? For the next 2 months, I kept my mouth shut tighter than a jar of pickles. Meanwhile, the The family kept up their usual routine. Sunday dinners at my parents' house, where Trevor would show up in his shiny new Ford F-150, talking about his latest construction contracts and how business was booming. You know what they say, Trevor would grin, raising his Bud Light. Hard work pays off eventually. I'd just sit there picking at Mom's pot roast, knowing that his hard work was funded by my grandmother's money. It took everything I had not to throw my mashed potatoes right at his smug face. Mom would always make these little comments too, like, maybe you should ask Trevor for some business advice, honey. Look how well he's doing for himself. Or Dad would chip in with, Trevor's really made something of himself, shows what determination can do. The irony was so thick you could cut it with a butter knife. But I had a plan. Mr. Johnson and I decided to serve the papers right before Thanksgiving. Dinner. Maximum impact, maximum family audience, maximum drama. I'm not usually one for theatrics, but these people had been lying to my face for 3 years while I struggled financially. They deserved everything they were about to get. The lawsuit named Trevor my parents and demanded full restitution of the inheritance plus interest, which by then totaled about $120,000. We also included a clause about Trevor's business profits made using the stolen funds. 3 days before Thanksgiving, a process server showed up at Trevor's job site and handed him the papers. According to my cousin Sarah, who heard it through the family grapevine, Trevor went absolutely ballistic. He called my parents screaming about how I was trying to destroy the family and being greedy. But the best part? None of them called me directly. They probably figured they could smooth things over at Thanksgiving dinner, maybe guilt-trip me into dropping the whole thing. They had no idea I was just getting started. Thanksgiving Day arrived, and I showed up at my parents' house like nothing had happened. I even brought a pumpkin pie from the grocery store bakery, playing the part of the dutiful daughter perfectly. The whole extended family was there. Aunts, uncles, cousins, the works. Trevor was there too, looking like he hadn't slept in days. He kept shooting me these dirty looks across the dinner table, but I just smiled and asked him how business was going. It's fine, he muttered, stabbing his turkey like it had personally offended him. After dinner, when everyone was gathered in the living room watching football and arguing about whether the Cowboys were going to choke again this year, I stood up and cleared my throat. Hey everyone, I have something I'd like to share. The room got quiet, and I pulled out a folder from my purse. Inside were copies of the court documents, the will, and the bank records. So, it turns out Grandma left me $100,000 in her will, I announced, my voice steady as a rock. Funny thing is, nobody thought to mention that to me. You could have heard a pin drop. Even the football game seemed to get quieter. I continued. What's even funnier is that the money somehow ended up funding Trevor's business, instead of helping me pay off my student loans like Grandma intended. Trevor jumped up from his recliner. Now wait just a minute. Sit down, Trevor, I said calmly. I'm not finished. Update. The confrontation scene is about to get intense. How do you think my family reacted when I revealed everything? This is where it gets really good. I held up the court documents for everyone to see, so I hired a lawyer, and guess what? Taking someone's inheritance and giving it to someone else is illegal. Who knew? My dad's face had gone completely white. Mom looked like she was about to faint. But Trevor was turning red as a fire. Truck, you can't be serious, he sputtered. That money helped me start a legitimate business. I've created jobs. I'm contributing to the community. With my money, I interrupted. Money that Grandma specifically left to me in her will. I pulled out the original will and started reading aloud. To my beloved granddaughter, who has always been responsible with money and who I know will use this gift wisely, I leave $100,000. Aunt Linda gasped. Uncle Mike was staring at my parents like they'd grown second heads. My cousin Sarah was filming the whole thing on her phone. I'd have to remember to ask her for a copy later. The court has ordered full restitution, I continued, plus interest and legal fees. That comes to about $120,000 due within 60 days. Trevor exploded. This is ridiculous. You're going to destroy everything I've built over some technicality? Technicality? I laughed, and it came out sharper than I intended. You mean the law? Yeah, those technicalities can be real inconvenient when you've been stealing from family members. Dad finally found his voice. Now, sweetheart, let's not be hasty. We can work something out as a family, like you worked something out when you decided to steal my inheritance. I shot back. When you sat there and told me Grandma had nothing left? When you watched me work 2 jobs while Trevor lived it up with my money? The room was dead silent except for the sound of the football game still playing in the background. Some commentator was going on about a touchdown, completely oblivious to the family drama unfolding in living rooms across America. Mom was crying now, dabbing at her eyes with a napkin. We thought we were doing the right thing. Trevor needed help getting started, and you were so young. I was 26, Mom, and Trevor was 30. How was giving my inheritance to your nephew who's older than me doing the right thing? Uncle Mike stood up, looking disgusted. You people actually stole from your own daughter? What the hell is wrong with you? That opened the floodgates. Suddenly, everyone was talking at once. Aunt Linda was demanding to know what else my parents had lied about. Cousin Sarah was asking if they'd stolen from other family members. Even my quiet Uncle Bob was shaking his head in disappointment. But I wasn't done yet. I had one more announcement that was going to really blow their minds. Here's what's going to happen with the money once I get it back, I said, raising my voice over the chaos. I'm starting a charitable foundation in Grandma's name. It's going to provide college scholarships for kids from low-income families who demonstrate academic excellence despite financial hardship. The room went quiet again. You could practically see the wheels turning in everyone's heads. Grandma always believed education was the key to breaking cycles of poverty, I continued. She worked 2 jobs to put herself through nursing school back in the day. This foundation will help kids who remind me of her, and frankly, kids who remind me of myself 3 years ago when I was struggling to pay off student loans because my family decided to steal my inheritance. Trevor slumped back into his chair like all the air had been let out of him. You're really going to give it all away, just to spite us? I'm going to honor Grandma's memory and her values, I corrected. Something you all should have thought about before you decided to play fast and loose with her final wishes. I started packing up my documents, preparing to leave. Oh, and Trevor, you might want to call your lawyer. You've got 55 days left to come up with the money. As I headed toward the door, something amazing happened. Aunt Linda started clapping. Then Uncle Mike joined in. Then Cousin Sarah. Pretty soon, half the room was applauding while my parents and Trevor sat there looking like they'd been hit by a truck. I walked out of that house with my head held high for the first time in 3 years. The next few weeks were absolutely wild. Trevor tried everything to get out of paying. He claimed the money was tied up in business assets, that paying it back would bankrupt him, that I was being unreasonable and vindictive. His lawyer even tried to argue that the original transfer had been a family gift rather than theft. Mr. Johnson shut that down real quick. We had documentation showing that my parents had explicitly told me there was no inheritance, which proved they knew they were doing something wrong. You can't give someone a gift with money that isn't yours to give. Meanwhile, my phone was blowing up with messages from my parents and Trevor. Dad sent these long, rambling texts about family loyalty and forgiveness. Mom left tearful voicemails begging me to work things out like adults. Trevor alternated between threatening legal action and promising to pay me back gradually if I'd just drop the lawsuit. I ignored all of them. They'd had 3 years to come clean, 3 years to make things right. They'd chosen to keep lying to my face while I struggled financially. As far as I was concerned, they'd made their bed. The rest of the family took sides pretty quickly. Most of my aunts, uncles, and cousins were on Team Justice. They were horrified that my parents had stolen from their own daughter and disgusted that they'd covered it up for so long. Uncle Mike even called to apologize for not questioning Trevor's sudden windfall earlier, but a few relatives tried to play peacemaker, suggesting that I was being too harsh and that families should forgive each other. To them, I said, would you forgive someone who stole your car, your house, your future? Because that's essentially what they did. On December 15th, Trevor's lawyer called to say they were ready to settle. Turns out, when you're facing a lawsuit, you can't win and you've got a business to protect. Coming up with $120,000 becomes a lot more manageable. The money hit my bank account 2 days before Christmas. I stared at that balance for about 10 minutes, still not quite believing it was real. Then I called Mr. Johnson to start the paperwork for the charitable foundation. Christmas that year was different. I spent it volunteering at a local homeless shelter instead of pretending everything was fine at another awkward family dinner. It felt good to do something meaningful with my time instead of sitting around a table with people who'd betrayed me. The foundation launched in February with the name Eleanor's Promise. That was my grandma's name. Our mission statement was simple. Provide college scholarships to academically gifted students from low-income families, with preference given to first-generation college students. I enrolled in nonprofit management courses at the community college and discovered I actually loved the work. There's something incredibly satisfying about taking something terrible that happened to you and turning it into something that helps other people. Our first scholarship recipient was this kid named Marcus from the south side of town. Straight A student, worked part-time at a grocery store to help his mom pay rent, dreamed of becoming an engineer but couldn't afford college. When we called to tell him he'd won a full-ride scholarship to State University, he cried on the phone. That's when I knew I'd made the right choice. Trevor's business eventually failed, by the way. Turns out when you're built on stolen money and you have to give back a huge chunk of your working capital, it's hard to stay afloat. He ended up having to sell his fancy truck and move back in with his parents. I heard through the family grapevine that he blamed me for ruining his life, but honestly, I slept just fine at night. My parents tried reaching out a few more times, usually around holidays or my birthday. They'd send cards talking about forgiveness and family bonds, but never actually acknowledging what they'd done wrong or apologizing for it. It was always, mistakes were made language, like the theft had just happened spontaneously without anyone making conscious decisions. I returned, their cards unopened. 2 years later, Eleanor's Promise has awarded scholarships to 15 students. We've expanded to offer summer internship programs and financial literacy workshops. I left my job at Target to work full-time for the foundation, and for the first time in my adult life, I wake up excited about my work. Sometimes I think about what Grandma would say if she could see how things turned out. I think she'd be proud that I stood up for myself and didn't let anyone take advantage of me. But mostly, I think she'd love knowing that her money is helping kids get the education she always believed was so important. The best part? Every single scholarship check we write has a little note attached that says, in memory of Eleanor, who believed everyone deserves a chance to succeed. Trevor's name doesn't appear anywhere on our materials, and neither do my parents. They don't get to claim credit for the good that came from their betrayal. I still see them occasionally at big family events like weddings or funerals. We nod politely but don't really talk. Some people might think that's sad, but I've learned that you can't have a relationship with people who fundamentally don't respect you. They proved they saw me as less important than their golden boy nephew. And that's not something you just get over. But you know what? I'm okay with that. I've built a life I'm proud of, surrounded by people who value honesty and integrity. The foundation keeps growing, helping more kids every year. And every time one of our scholarship recipients graduates college, I think about how Grandma's final gift is still rippling outward, creating opportunities she never could have imagined. Sometimes the best revenge really is living well, and helping others live well too. That's my story, and I'm sticking to it. Thanks for reading, everyone.